In 2018, Harley-Davidson, one of America's most iconic brands, made a shocking announcement. They were moving production overseas. For over a century, Harley had proudly built motorcycles in the United States. Their bikes were a symbol of American manufacturing, the open road and blue-collar jobs. So why would a company with such deep American roots suddenly decide to shift production out of the country? The answer was simple: tariffs. The moment Trump imposed a 25% tariff on imported steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum, raw material costs surged. Harley-Davidson, like most manufacturers, relied on imported steel to keep production costs competitive. Practically overnight, the price of manufacturing a Harley went up, but it wasn't just the cost of steel that hurt them. The European Union hit back against Trump's tariffs with retaliatory tariffs on US-made motorcycles, raising the price of Harleys in Europe by 31%. Europe wasn't just any market for Harley, it was their second largest, accounting for nearly 16% of total sales. Suddenly, American-made Harleys were too expensive for European buyers. Faced with higher steel costs at home and collapsing sales abroad, Harley had no choice. The company announced it would shift some production to Thailand, India, and Brazil to avoid the trade war's impact. That meant fewer manufacturing jobs in the United States and a public relations nightmare for the Trump administration. Trump, who had used Harley-Davidson as an example of American manufacturing success, lashed out. He accused them of betraying American workers and even suggested they would be taxed for outsourcing. But the reality was simple. The tariffs had backed Harley into a corner, and Harley wasn't alone. It was just the first major warning sign that tariffs were doing more harm than good. The bigger question was, if an all-American company like Harley couldn't survive the tariffs, what about the rest of the economy? If Harley-Davidson was the first warning sign, what happened next proved that tariffs weren't just a problem for one company, they were a problem for the entire economy. The promise behind tariffs sounds simple: tax foreign imports, make American-made products more competitive, and bring jobs back home. And at first glance, it looked like it was working. A few steel plants reopened and employment in steel manufacturing ticked up from 81,400 to 83,600. But what no one asked was, at what cost? When the price of steel spiked, it wasn't just Harley-Davidson that struggled. Every business that used steel had to make a choice: eat the cost, raise prices, or cut jobs. For General Motors and Ford, the answer was brutal. In just 1 year, higher steel and aluminum costs wiped out over $1 billion in profits. To compensate, Ford cut thousands of jobs. Even Whirlpool, one of the biggest supporters of the tariffs, felt the impact. They had pushed for steel tariffs, hoping it would weaken foreign competitors. Instead, as steel prices surged, their own costs exploded. Whirlpool had to increase prices on American consumers and lay off workers, a direct contradiction to what they had hoped for. And this wasn't just about steel. The tariffs triggered a chain reaction. The more the United States taxed foreign imports, the more other countries retaliated, and that's when the trade war officially began. Trade wars are never one-sided. The second the United States imposed tariffs, other countries hit back. China, Canada, and the EU placed retaliatory tariffs on American exports. And the hardest hit, US farmers. Soybean exports to China collapsed by over 50%, not because American soybeans weren't competitive, but because China stopped buying them in response to US tariffs. Millions of bushels sat unsold and farm incomes plummeted. The damage was so bad that the Trump administration had to issue a $28 billion bailout package to keep farmers afloat. But no bailout could replace lost market share. China simply shifted its business elsewhere, strengthening trade relationships with Brazil and Argentina instead of relying on American agriculture. At the same time, American manufacturers, many of whom depended on global supply chains, suddenly found themselves paying higher costs for raw materials and losing access to foreign customers. The very businesses tariffs were supposed to help were now struggling to survive. Steel jobs increased slightly, but businesses that relied on steel, like auto manufacturers, farmers, and construction companies, faced higher costs, forcing some to cut jobs or raise prices. This wasn't just a one-time issue, nor was it the first time tariffs had unexpected consequences. Tariffs have been used throughout American history, and every time they've sparked intense debate. Some argue they protect domestic industries and workers, others warn they do more harm than good. But one thing is clear: tariffs have consequences. Take the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. It was meant to shield American farmers and manufacturers by raising tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods. Instead, it triggered global retaliation. Countries like Canada, France, and Britain responded with their own tariffs on American products, and within 2 years, US exports dropped by 61%. Many economists believe this deepened the Great Depression. Then there was George W. Bush's steel tariffs in 2002. The goal was to protect American steel producers, just like Trump's tariffs years later. But when steel prices jumped 30%, industries that use steel, like auto parts manufacturers and construction firms, saw their costs skyrocket. As a result, some companies were forced to cut jobs or move production elsewhere. Estimates suggest that 200,000 jobs were lost in steel-reliant industries, which led Bush to lift the tariffs after just 21 months. So, do tariffs work? The answer depends on who you ask. For industries facing foreign competition, tariffs can provide a lifeline. But history shows that they also invite retaliation, often raise costs, and sometimes lead to unintended economic consequences. And yet, despite the risks, tariffs keep coming back. Even as of recent, when Trump brought back 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. If history tells us anything, it's that tariffs alone won't be enough to drive the level of American production desired. If you want more insights into how economic policies and businesses impact your daily life, hit that subscribe button, because understanding the economy means understanding how it shapes your job, your finances, and your future.